I'm always pleased to come on after somebody from ORCID has been talking, because they always explain the name disambiguation problem, the name ambiguity problem very well, so I don't have to do that bit. So what I want to do this morning is just talk about some of the work we've been doing in names, and about how what we're doing fits into the international scene as well as the local one. This slide is a very gross generalization about approaches to author identification that have been happening in different fields over the last, well, several decades in the case of libraries, and in the last decade for publishers. So librarians have always been interested in disambiguating authors, but at the level of books generally. So they're not really interested in identifying the authors of articles in journals, and the publishers are. Librarians generally make sure they've got the right author when they create an authority file first. With the publisher systems, they create an identifier for each name that they come across, and the disambiguation then is passed back to the person concerned for them to say, yes, I wrote that article, no, I didn't write this one, which was written by somebody else with the same name. So different approaches. And the authors that generally aren't involved in the library systems, the librarians decide that this is you, and then the authors don't have much say in it, which can cause problems where, for example, people will put dates of birth into your library authority file. Some authors don't like that. But with the publisher systems, again, the authors are more involved. And in the past, certainly, the publisher systems have been proprietary systems, whereas the library systems have been more open. Okay, so that's the sort of, it's a very gross generalization, but that's the two different approaches. And with the current international activity, I'm seeing some parallels with what's gone before. So we've got two big initiatives at the moment with ORCID, which you've just heard about, and the ISNI identifier as well, which has come more out of the library world, where ORCID has come more out of the publisher world. And there are some similarities with the two approaches I had on the first slide, where the disambiguation is happening first with ISNI and later, as we heard earlier, with ORCID. Again, the authors aren't so involved with the ISNI side of things, whereas ORCID is very author-driven. So different approaches there. And ISNI has got a very broad scope, whereas ORCID is very focused on current researchers. And at a meeting in London in March, on digital author identifiers, there was a push to try and align these two approaches, the ISNI approach and the ORCID one. And ISNI has reserved a block of numbers for use by ORCID, and they're both going to be using these 16-digit identifiers. So signs of some convergence there, I think. Both ORCID and ISNI are going to be looking at using existing identifiers to help to populate their systems. These quotations are taken from the relevant websites. So ISNI is looking at getting high confidence data, they say, from different domains. ORCID is looking to link to other name identifier systems. So this is where I see a role for national name identifier systems. So we've got down at the bottom the institutions dealing with their own researchers. They're worried about identifying their own individual researchers, and then feeding that information through to a national system for that particular region or country. And then that information, I think, feeding back up again to the ISNI or ORCID system or any other international identifier system that might come along. So why do we need a national system? I've got 3 slides answering that question. The first one here, there's a lot of reporting that happens at a national level, and you need to know who your researchers are within that reporting context. And different countries have different reporting requirements. So in the UK, we have the research excellence framework, which happens periodically, and everybody has to report, all the institutions have to report on their top researchers and the work that they've done. So they need to know who those researchers are in order to take part. And part of the cost, it's a very expensive exercise. It used to be called the research assessment exercise. It's very expensive. And part of the expense of that process is the fact that the researchers are not uniquely identified. So having unique identifiers at a national level for the research excellence framework is important. And we also have the Higher Education Statistics Agency in the UK, which again is interested in uniquely identifying researchers. And I'm sure every nation has its own equivalent to these requirements. I think one thing that a national service can do possibly more easily than an international one is the interaction with local institutions and local researchers. It's easier for us to understand where our particular constituency are coming from, what their particular requirements are, and we can respond to requests for customization to our service to reflect the needs of that particular audience. And you can also define the scope of your service in a way that makes sense to your particular environment. We've been talking to archivists, for example, about identifying people who are no longer with us. So historical figures who created archives who you might want to be able to identify, but obviously they're not current researchers who are going to be publishing articles. So it's a different context. So you might want to define your context differently from the way that an international service might want to define it. And disambiguation is something we've talked about already today, and it's the hardest part to get right. There are lots of people with the same names out there. And I think that OCLC's VIAF system is one example of a system which shows that when you've got nationally disambiguated library authority files and bring them together, you can successfully create a combined system, but you had to have done that disambiguation first. So in terms of national author identification schemes, there are quite a few out there. Martin mentioned the Brazilian system, LATES, earlier on. JISC paid for this report to be published last year, which looked at a whole series of national author identifier services around the world. And it's not complete. I know I've missed at least one or two systems. Like I found out about the Portuguese system just last month, for example. So it wasn't every single system out there, but we looked at quite a few, and we sent a survey out to the managers of these systems, and they responded and gave us quite a lot of information about how the system worked, who runs it, how it's funded, and how they create the data in the system, for example. So it was quite an interesting exercise, and huge variations across the different nations as to how they run these systems. So this is just a summary slide there as to how many identities, for example, are in each of these systems and how long they've been running. And again, a lot of them are very recent and very new, and therefore don't have a lot of data in them. And this whole area is very new. So it's quite an exciting area to be working in because it changes every year. Every year it changes. And this is an example of one of the tables from the report, so just showing you the different ways that records are actually created. So some of them are more of a library-based system in that cataloguers are involved in creating the records in the first place. Nearly all of them import records from other systems, and some of them allow the data subjects, the researchers themselves, to create records, but by no means all of them. And most of them are a mix of two of those methods. So with the ones that have been going for longer, you can begin to see some commonalities across them. So usually where they've been going for a while, that there is a national organisation which has an oversight of the system. And the system's usually integrated with the funding bodies, the reporting agencies, and right down to the level of institutional repositories. And those institutions have roles about their researchers and how information about the researchers is recorded and shared. So in the UK, obviously, which is the situation I'm working in, our project began in 2006 as part of a repositories program. So we were already in the repositories sort of area when we first started. And MIMUS, which is part of it's a data centre at the University of Manchester, and the British Library put together a proposal to investigate the requirements for a national service and to build a pilot system that would demonstrate its potential. So our original plan with names was to use the British Library's ZTOC service, which is an electronic table of contents service for journal articles from 1993, and to use that to create author identifiers. But ZTOC is huge. I mean, going back to 1993, there's millions of articles, and we realised that, and because it's international in scope, all the authors, were from all around the world, so we were suddenly dealing with a huge amount of information. And there wasn't any affiliation data in there, and it was only initials, not full first names. So it was hard to process this data to get anything meaningful out of it. So we gave up on that idea, and were fortunate in that while the project was running, the 2008 research assessment exercise data was processed by another group and made available. So we were able to use that. So this had information about the researchers and their articles and their institutional affiliations, and they were all UK researchers, so it was exactly the sort of information we needed in order to create some names identifiers. So we have a matching algorithm which runs across the data and identifies possible matches within the data, and then assigns identifiers to the individuals that are then distinct individuals that have then been identified. And then we have a quality assurance process, which is actually done by a team at the British Library, who are also involved with the NACO name authority files. So these are people who have got a lot of experience in NACO work and name authority work. So they do the quality assurance for us. And it was a good data set. There weren't a lot of duplicates in it anyway. There were some which the process identified. Even though we only had initials again and not full first names. But we ran into one problem with these two people, Derek Civiter and his identical twin brother, David Civiter, who have the same initials, and they both work in the same field, paleontology, and they both write articles together. So this apparently is known as the Civiter problem, and I don't think there's a name authority system out there that doesn't have a hiccup. I don't know what their parents were thinking about, giving them the same initials. Anyway, so we had to manually intervene with these two and put their full names into the system to make it work. So they do now have two separate names identifiers in the system. They at least work at different institutions, I suppose. That's something. Okay, so the merit data from the RAE in 2008 covers, we think, about 20% of active UK researchers. So we've got a fifth of UK researchers in the system as a result of that exercise. And we're now looking to expand what's in the system to cover more of the UK's active researchers. And to do that, we're dealing directly with institutional repositories in the UK and getting them to send us their lists or to harvest their repositories and get the data that way. We're also still looking at the British Library data sets to see if we can get more useful information from them now that we've got a base level of information ourselves. And we also now have a submission form so that if a researcher wants to put themselves in the system, if they're not already there, they can fill in the form and get themselves a name identifier in names. Quality is really important in this process. The automatic matching can only achieve so much, and we do need that team at the British Library to check the level of matching that happens every time we add a new data set. And it varies a lot. The data sources vary enormously, even just within the institutional repositories. Some have very good data, which has already been fairly well disambiguated. Other ones, it's a real mismatch. I was going to say mess, but it's, you know, it varies a lot. And so sometimes it's more work than others to get the data right. And obviously, for an individual researcher, this is really important. You know, the fact that you're getting personal information about them. I mean, it's publicly available information, but the fact that you might get that wrong is really important not to, and to get that right. And at the moment, we haven't got a mechanism for people to actually go in and edit their own records, although that's something we would like to do. But they can report an issue with a record and get us to correct it if there's something wrong. And as far as access goes, there's an API to the data which is openly available and allows for flexible searching of the names data. And we created last year a plugin for the ePrints repository software, which means that as you start to type a name into the author field of the repository, it automatically populates with a list. So here's the form that people are filling in with the name of the researcher. And as you start to type, it brings back a list of people from the names system with their names identifier, and when you hover over it on the right of the screen there, you can see that the affiliation information and the field of interest and publication data pops up, so you can be confident that that's the right Brian Cox in this case that you want to put in as your co-author. And obviously, the more data is in the system, the more useful this sort of plugin becomes. So the ultimate aim for names is to get this high-quality set of unique identifiers for the UK researchers, which is then available to the other systems. So whether they're national systems, so for the reporting processes and things like that, international systems like ISNI and ORCID, or institutional systems. So within an institutional repository, like with the API you've just seen, the ePrints plugin. So currently we've sent our data off to the ISNI people, and they've come back and sent us over 40,000 ISNI numbers for the names identities. So they've already got ISNIs, and obviously in the future we'd like to have ORCIDs associated with these records as well. The whole business model for a service like this is a difficult area, but there are possible services we can provide to other institutions which might generate income to help sustain such a service. So we did a survey of repository managers back in July 2010, and we said to them, would you be willing to pay for additional services like disambiguating data sets, or helping to identify people from a data set you already have, to assign identifiers to them. And a quarter of the people who replied said yes, they'd be willing to pay for such services, which we were quite encouraged by and surprised by. So there are possible ways of generating data of generating income from this sort of data. Though ideally we'd like to make it available, the base service would be available free. So just to summarise then why I think a national system is important. it's a high quality. It could be a high quality resource that can be reused in other systems, international ones, national reporting, and within local institutions to improve institutional repositories, researcher information systems in a flexible and scalable way. And that's where Names lives. So if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question regarding the time schedule for service rollouts, either for a national authority service such as Names or for ORCID. I figure out that should be kind of a snowball progression. Once the value-added services are provided to the users, to the researchers, so that they will become interested in being part of the system. Is that the way Names has been progressing, and could it provide some kind of model for ORCID in the future?
In terms of...
I mean, I don't know what rate of UK researchers is currently covered by the Names project.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
What I mean is the curve. I mean,
how
the growth.
quickly you get to a point where the service is actually useful. Yeah. This is a big question. And at the meeting I talked about in March, you were there, Martin? Yeah. We talked about 80% as being this figure where suddenly your service becomes very useful. So that we're at 20% with Names at the moment, so we're still not useful. So we have to get to that point. I mean, and that was just a figure pulled out of the air, so we don't know if 80% is useful. But certainly having a majority of your researchers, then suddenly your service is something that people want to use. When you've only got 20%, I mean, even though those are the top 20% arguably, because they're the people who are included in the research assessment exercise, so they're the ones that the universities were proud of. So we've got the good researchers in there, if you like. But yes, you'd still want to have a lot more than that for it to be a usable, useful service. And it's how you get to that point and still have funding to get to that point that's the difficult part. So yeah, I don't think we've got anything we can teach ORCID about that apart from it's difficult.
Ideally, national authority systems should be easier to, cover a wider, since the scope is
exactly
narrower.
It's the scalability issue. Yeah. I mean, that's with ORCID. The numbers I've heard about the number of researchers in the world are like 7 million or something.
I don't think anybody knows how many.
No, well, Jerry has got some statistics on this, which I don't want to steal his thunder, but which he's going to talk to us about after coffee. But which was reassuring to me to know at least roughly how many there are in the UK, because I'd been guessing up till today when I talked to Jerry earlier. So we now have a figure at least for how many there are in the UK, and it's not as scary as 7 million anyway. So yes, that's what I think, that a national system, at least you've got a smaller pool, and you can deal, perhaps it's not like you're trying to describe insects or car parts. These are people, and they've got strong opinions about how they're described online. So you have to have, at some level, a personal relationship with those people. So with a national system or a regional system, it's more possible to have that personal relationship to deal with those individuals than it is with a big international system. Yeah.